There's this tension that we feel as Christians as we walk with God's sovereignty and free will. Even if you think it's a bad decision, God works all things for our good and his glory. So even if there's not a clear one, he's still going to use it. He's still going to use it because he promises it.
Welcome to Clarity Over Chaos, the podcast brought to you by Women in Apologetics, where we cut through the noise of culture to help teen girls and young women build a confident Christian worldview. Hello, everyone. I'm Cassie, and as you can see, Jade couldn't be with us this week, but I do have a very special guest named Whitney. She is our ministry relations coordinator for WIA, and she is typically behind the scenes as our producer. So welcome, Whitney.
Thanks, Cassie. I'm excited to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. Well, I am a wife, a mom of 4, so I fit in well with the Clarity Over Chaos out here. In fact, my son was just at the door like, hey, growling. You probably heard it before we started recording. And we're in the middle of a move, just like everyone else this season, because my husband's retiring from the military. So we're leaving Georgia and headed to the Knoxville area. And I work here at WIA, so it's great.
That's such a beautiful area. I'm excited for you.
Me too. So, I'm ready for 4 seasons. The mosquitoes, the alligators, and the gnats here are just not my bag. So
you got to get above that gnat line. No dodging gnat line. Yeah. So we usually like to share, as you know, some of our recent chaos. So can you tell me what some of your recent chaos has been?
Just like everyone else in this podcast theme this year, we are in the middle of a move. We are moving from South Georgia up to the Knoxville area. And the average day on market in this area is about 30 to 45 days because we're a military community. So it's moving a little bit faster than most places, but a little bit slow, So there's like 5 houses in my immediate neighborhood that have been on the market for 3 to 6 months. Our house went under contract in 11 days.
Wow.
It was like, oh my goodness. And then they didn't want to have more than a 30-day close. So we close in less than 4 weeks and we don't have a place to go right now. And so I'm sitting my husband this weekend, kind of relinquishing control over the housing and saying, hey, go find us a place to live. So it's a bit chaotic, but the Lord he directs our steps. So.
Wow. That is chaotic. Yeah.
What about you? Because I know that you are also trying to settle from a move.
Yes, we're still technically in the process, but we're in that, since we're moving ourselves, we've just got all the little bits and pieces left now. And my husband's garage, all those massive tools. But yeah, our source of chaos has actually been, it's the 21st century. I keep checking that because for some reason I can't seem to get internet at my house. And I would swear that is a core part of human existence in the West during this century. But
you would think it would be, but
you would think. But it took our internet provider, who shall remain unnamed, several weeks to come out and tell us that they would have to re-engineer their network to bring us internet, and that is not a free service they were willing to provide. So we would have to pay $8,000 for them to do this. And they supposedly have the monopoly on our area for internet. And so I said, well, I don't think so. No, we're not going to do that. So the gentleman who came did point out, well, there is already this internet service provider on that pole over there if you wanted to go with them, but they're not as good, And
they failed to tell you that.
Well, at least you told me it's there. So it was nice meeting you. Anyway, I called the other provider and they said, well, we can't be out for another month, but we'll bring you internet then. So hopefully the first week of October, somewhere in there, somebody will show up at my door and bring me internet. And life will be back to some semblance.
You will be back to modern day living.
I am telling you, it has been weird. It's like a flashback to my high school years almost, of we're on DVDs and we're on,
It's really great though, in some respect, because it's like a little bit of a,
Yes.
what's the word I'm looking for?
Reprieve.
Yeah. The kids know
Yeah.
there's no internet, so they don't get their way if they want to watch a show or whatever.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly what it is. Saturday morning cartoons, they have very limited options now. So, well, anyway, yeah, it's been really interesting. And mostly we've actually discovered we don't miss it as much as we thought we would.
Yeah.
And it has been good for like my husband and I play card games at night now instead of watching a show or something. But important things like homeschool testing, that kind of stuff, I need the internet for that.
And recording podcast episodes.
Yes, also that. It would be nice to be in my basement little office and not have pyramids behind me glowing like there are aliens coming.
Not today's topic.
Not today's topic. Moving on to today's topic. We are going to talk about you and your life, and really this idea of how can we know God's plan for our life? How can we discern God's will and in the decisions we make, and where that's going to take us in life? And it almost never, I feel like, matches the plans we make for ourselves. So just to start us off, let's start after high school, kind of after maybe mid-college, somewhere in there. When did you really start thinking about your plan for your life and what you thought you wanted it to be?
Yeah, so I always really knew that I wanted to be married and to have children. Like that was always a desire. But obviously, when there's no prospects in the mix, you have to figure out what to do. And so college seemed like the next natural step for me. And I never really knew what I wanted to do with my life, to be honest. Even going to college, I didn't declare a major. In fact, I went and I kind of dabbled in different majors. I started out as a criminal justice major. Ooh. And I took one class that scared me so badly. I went to the guidance office or whatever it was, the admissions office, and changed my major. I was like, nope, can't do this. And I was getting to the point I had to declare a major, and I literally like looked at the desk next to me. I was in Spanish class, and this guy had a handout of his degree track through marketing, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went and I changed my major and finished out my major in college. But I met my husband, my now husband, well, my only husband, but I met him probably my sophomore year of college, and we started dating. He's in the military, like I mentioned before, and we knew pretty quickly we wanted to get married. And so I knew that he had a combat job at the time, and so really my thought process was, how would I ever support a family if something happened to him? So I really wanted to continue my education, even though my plan was that I would raise my children if they were in my home. So I finished college, and after his third deployment, I got pregnant with our first daughter, and then the Lord moved us to Germany. So like I couldn't find jobs in my field before I got pregnant, and then I had this baby. And then we're moving overseas. So of course I'm not going to find a job in my degree track. And so I was like, that was a waste. That was my like earthly mindset, right? That was a waste. Why did I waste all that money on a degree when I was just gonna not be able to use it? So yeah. So anyways, we moved to Germany, and over the course of many things, here I am. So and we'll get to that in a minute. So
yes, and you're so good. I don't think that marketing degree was a waste at all, because as our ministry relations coordinator, you have done phenomenal things. I wish I could list them all for everyone, but I can't.
No need.
How about like during those times of change, during when things kept seeming to pivot like that, how did you lean on your faith? How did your faith help you through all that?
Yeah, so just my personal testimony, I got saved when I was very young. So I always had a desire to serve God wherever I was. And so, but through a series of events in the middle of college, I walked not necessarily away from my faith, but I wasn't walking with the Lord. And so I didn't have a godly mindset about making decisions or anything like that. When the Lord moved us to Germany. My husband Eric, he deployed probably 3 months after we got there.
Oh,
So the
wow.
Lord stripped me of my family,
Mhm.
my friends, my community. And I was like, I'm in this foreign country with a baby. I don't have any
Mhm.
friends. And so I started researching churches in the local area. And so I went to a church who had a deployment spouse ministry and got plugged into women's ministry. And so for the first time in my life, I was starting to be discipled in the word intentionally. And
Mhm.
so I really started to begin thinking, okay, well, the Lord obviously has me here. What does that mean for now? And how can I serve
Mhm.
him where I'm at? And so there was a hole in the women's ministry department to start planning women's retreats or
Oh.
women's ministry retreats. And so while I was there, I started planning it from the ground up. It was like our inaugural one, and then kind of got to hand it over after I
Mhm.
left. But there has been so many pivots in my life. Um, because as Proverbs 16:9 says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. And so when you start to get something established, of course, the military, also
Yeah.
God's sovereignty, moved us
Mhm.
from Germany to Florida. And I had just started working at a church there. And again, a series of events. We left that church and I had a baby, and then COVID
Mhm.
happened. And so really every time there was a next step, I I started praying, Lord, what do you have for me here? Please show
Mhm.
me. And then walking in faith if I didn't feel like there was an answer. And
Mhm.
typically if you sit and you kind of observe where you're at in ministry, there is usually some sort of hole that
Mhm.
God has for your particular giftings and your talents
Mhm.
that you can start walking in faithfulness too. So,
Sure. Did you ever worry that you weren't making the right decisions?
oh,
Or
all the time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, even the decision that my husband and I were making about whether we left that current church and whatever, it was agonizing.
Mhm.
Um, but in those decisions, we sought wise counsel.
Mhm.
We prayed. And we really asked the Lord to show us. And we would kind of make like hey, we're going to commit to praying for 6 months before we would ever make a decision. And
Mhm.
so I think what young women today in our culture, something that is hard to kind of grasp is that as a married woman with my husband making decisions is different than when I was single, right? So when I was
Mhm.
single, obviously First Corinthians 7 says that when you're unmarried, you have more time to be devoted to the Lord. But when I'm married, a lot of the times I get to kind of yield to my husband's
Mhm.
decisions. He has the ultimate quote authority over what we do in our life. And so even if I was unsure, he was like, it's my responsibility to lead us
Mhm.
in faithfulness. And so if you're single, obviously you have to follow the Lord's leading in the way
Mhm.
that he specifically calls you. If you're married, you're having to navigate, how do I joyfully submit to my husband's decisions? So yeah, there was a lot of like I would say chaos in some of
Mhm.
those decisions, but God always used it, you know. So
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned taking time too, because I feel like a lot of times in our culture we're so fast paced now. Everything is immediate, immediate gratification, immediate changes, immediate decisions. And I think people are sometimes even afraid to take the time because something might pass them by, FOMO, the fear of missing out or whatever it may be. They're afraid to take the time to
mhm.
think through the decision, seek that wise counsel. I love that you mentioned that too, because that is so important. There are so many people who've gone ahead of us. And even though technology has changed,
Yeah.
a lot has changed, they still have wisdom to add. And so I love that you mentioned that. What kind of advice would you give to someone who does need to make a quick decision, though? Like maybe they're graduating, they've been offered two jobs or something like that. What kind of advice would you give to someone who does need to make that quick decision?
Yeah, the advice that I would give over and over when people even ask us of like, how do you even make decisions when it feels like you don't have the ability to, like with the
Mhm.
military? Um, really, if you're seeking the Lord for your path in life, he opens doors in a way that's kind of, it feels supernatural a little bit when it's happening. So I'll take our current move, for instance. With my husband retiring, this is the very first time we've had to make a decision. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? What are you going to do? And so he started sending his resume off to companies all over the South. And only one company responded with, "We'd like to interview you." So he interviewed. A month, two goes by, and we're like, "What's going on?" And so we were trying to come up with a plan B when he was like, "Hey, I'm going to ask for some feedback just to see, if I can get some clarity on what happened." And they're like, "Oh yeah, we're working on your acceptance package." And we're like, "Oh, yeah, be here by November." And we're like, "Oh," so we're pushing it up further, and we're like, that's really fast, right?
Yeah.
And so we started preparing, and in the process of preparing, every decision that we started making, from selling vehicles to when to put our house on the market, it was like we had to make a decision on what step to make next. And then the Lord just opened that door, and then opened that door, and opened that door. And like I mentioned earlier, our house is under contract in 11 days. And one of the sweet ladies at my church, I was talking to her about this, and she said, "Isn't the Lord cool?" Like in so many different ways, where when you're seeking him for his will, not ours, his will, he will make it apparent to you what you should do. He will open a door. And if he doesn't, he will work sovereignly in whatever decision you make. There's this tension that we feel as Christians as we walk with God's sovereignty and free will. And even if you think it's a bad decision, God works all things for our good and his glory. So even if there's not a clear one, he's still going to use it. He's still going to use it because he promises it. So
yeah, I love that. And there are two things I want to hit on there that you kind of mentioned. And the first one, I love that you mentioned like that he will clearly open doors. And it does make me think back to, like, sometimes I feel like we think doors have been closed, right? Like that door is closed when really it's maybe we're not looking at the right thing. And so the other part to that is then God may not tell us what he's doing, but we can look back and see what he was doing, right? God gives us that gift of being able to look back and see him at work. And so, like, for me, when I was trying to figure out a career path originally in the military, the job I wanted, I knew I couldn't get. And there's a lot of information there as to why, but basically there was a long line ahead of me of people that wanted the same job. And so I thought, that's not going to happen, really. That door must be closed. And I was kind of devastated. And so I just put my name on another list and said, well, God will do whatever. And I ended up with my first choice of place to go. And that's where I met my husband. And that's where, so like, I can look back and see how I was heartbroken over that, what I thought was a closed door, but really God was redirecting me to what his will really was for me to go to this place. That's how I got to live in England and meet my husband there. Right. So it's, I think sometimes it can feel like maybe a door is closed, but being patient with that and realizing it doesn't mean that there's not another one open. God's redirecting us. Like you said, he's in his sovereignty, he is directing us.
Well, in the waiting, what's the purpose of the waiting, right? So First Thessalonians 4:3 says that this is the will of God, that you may be sanctified. And so a lot of times we're in the waiting, he's sanctifying us, he's calling us to prayer, he's saying, do you trust me in that waiting, where he's seemingly silent? He's calling us to just trust him. And that's really hard because we want to I know I want to control. God, just bend to my will. But he, at sometimes he's asking us to hold our desires with open hands with him, so that he can do what's best for us. Even though we think we know what's best, we may not. So
if you've been impacted by clarity over chaos, or any of the resources that Women in Apologetics provides, would you consider partnering with us through a monthly gift? Your support helps us continue this vital work and reach even more individuals with the tools they need to stand firm in their faith. Personally, I am so proud to be a part of WIA because each woman on our team faithfully uses her gifts and abilities as we produce resources to equip our sisters in Christ to defend their faith. You can help support this mission of ours by getting started with a monthly gift at womeninapologetics.com/donate.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question was, what is your advice to someone who maybe is in that waiting?
Yeah.
What would your advice to them be? And what are some things they can do to ease that agony? Because it can be agonizing sometimes to have to wait on that. God's timing is perfect, but it doesn't always match ours.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things practically that we should be doing and that I would encourage people to do is first be in the Word. I mean, the Lord is the Word is living and active, and so that's how He's speaking to us is in the Word. And He says in His Word that we shouldn't be anxious for anything, and not to think about tomorrow because tomorrow will take care of itself. And so we should be in the Word. We should be praying. And then in our impatience, in our desire for control, we should be examining our hearts in that. Because I was just thinking about this past weekend. We got an offer on the house, and we were going back and forth on negotiations, and the buyers were quiet. And it's in that sense, it's hard. We were supposed to have an open house Sunday, and I'm like vacuuming and I'm mopping, and I'm like, if they would just give me an answer, I would know if I'm going to have an open house. And then as I'm praying through it, God really reminded me that I'm not in charge. And so really I had to repent of not trusting Him. And I didn't know it at the time, but my husband was doing the same thing at church. He was wrestling with the same frustration. But then, I'm sorry, Lord, I was not being patient. I should be trusting you in this. And then the next hour, we got the acceptance we got basically under contract. And the Lord doesn't always work like that. But like I said before, sometimes He's asking us to examine where we could be sinful in like trying to make Him bend to our will, And so pray, read the Bible, have your friends pray with you, remind you of that He is in control. We're called to be in community. And so having biblical friends come alongside you and say, hey, trust the Lord. Look at all the times, remind you of all the times that God has been faithful. And then really just try your best to submit to Him and have your decisions with open hands to the Lord. So,
yeah. Well, and I'm sure I'd love to hear from you. Like, are you able to look back on your life and really see that pattern of God working, and maybe in ways that you don't see until afterwards even? Are there examples of that where you can look back and say, I didn't realize that was God redirecting me, but I can see it now?
Yeah. So when we lived in Florida, I got a surprise pregnancy. That was not in our plan. Obviously, we were done. We thought we're good, financially. We thought our family was complete, and the Lord was like, no. And I was honestly a little bit upset because I was like, this is serious. I had been sick for a while, and I don't have great pregnancies. And so at the time, it was like, what are you doing, Lord? And then 6 days later, we got orders to move to Georgia, and it was like, what are you doing, Lord? And fast forward 9 months, my son was born, and the day before he was born, the military changed its paternity leave regulations. So my husband got 3 months off. Wow. So that was the day before my son was born. 2 weeks after he was born, my father-in-law passed away.
Oh.
And because of the changes in the military and because I had a baby, my husband was able to go up and be with his mother and to really take care of her without the burden of asking for leave and losing, income and all of that. And what's cool about that whole story is that my husband was also an oops baby. And so if you think about the Lord preparing even my mother-in-law, like the fact that there was this surprise pregnancy 43 years ago, right? And then he was preparing our entire family to be able to care for his mom in her time of grief. And during during the time that we were preparing for the funeral, she had this newborn baby that she just sat and rocked, and you know, it was a source of comfort for her, a source. And so we don't always understand what God's doing. And you know, we can see the life of Job. He didn't tell Job. We don't see any account where he tells Job why all of those things happened to him. But in his kindness, sometimes he does show us what he's up to. And it's really cool. And it's a testimony to his goodness when we're able to share and see those things. So
yeah, I love that story. That is great. Thank you for sharing that. What about along the way, what drew you to apologetics specifically? When did you get interested in that, and how did you find WIA?
Yeah, so during COVID, there was we actually had a virtual conference that year, and so that's I don't even know how I found out about it. I think me and my neighbor were both taking it virtually in 2021, but it was like I can't remember the timing, but the decision was to make it fully virtual. But I really started studying theology and apologetics when my oldest is a very gifted child. She has very deep questions. When she was about 4 years old, she came to me and was like, so Mom, you've told me that God knows everything, right? I said, yeah. And she said, okay, so if God knows everything, then why did he even create Lucifer in the first place? And I was like, really unprepared for my 4-year-old to ask that question. And I wouldn't say that I'm the type of apologist that knows every argument for everything, but I do believe that we're called to be prepared to give an account for what we believe. And my kids are in the public schools, and they come home daily with things. And really, they not only do they trust me and my husband for the information to dig through the word and to discuss the things that they're wrestling with in culture and versus what God says. Now they're starting to be the heart of evangelism is stirring up my children, where they're like, what does the world not get it? You know, and so really my desire is I don't think that we can live in this culture without apologetics. It's just everywhere you go. My daughter, you know, I sent you a message the other day. My daughter came home from school the other day and told me about social transitioning. Not medical transitioning, social transitioning. And I'm nearly 40. I'm not up to all the things that are going on in our culture, but I was like, tell me about that. And what do you think about that? And having her talk through that and then digging through the scriptures, what does God say about living a lie? You know? And so my passion really is to equip my children and first, and then also other women. I've always had a desire to help equip other women. So.
Oh, I love that. That is the same thing. That's so funny you tell that story, because that is the same thing that's the reason I got into apologetics, was I realized these kids are going to have questions. And for me, it was my oldest is my daughter as well. And she also is the very deep thinker. And her question was, why can't God forgive Satan? And it was just like this. Mommy needs a few minutes. I
wonder if our listeners know how to answer that question, those two questions, you know?
I know.
Don't send us a message, and we want to help with those questions. So
if you do, put some comments down there. What would you have said?
Yeah, what would you have said? And how, or would it have caught you off guard?
Yeah. I think it caught me off guard only because she was 5. Like, I thought I had a little more time.
Yeah.
But the kids they think deeply, and it is sanctifying. Like you said earlier, it's sanctifying because you realize, gosh, I need to be thinking about these things. Like you said, the culture, we can't live in this culture without knowing some of these answers. At least you don't have to know all of them, like you said, but
Yeah.
knowing some of them.
Well, and it's not just our children, right? I mean, like I said earlier, we're called to be in community. And so if we're in community with women who are younger than us and who are older than us, age doesn't necessarily matter in the maturity of the church, right? So just because I'm almost 40 doesn't mean that I am the most mature Christian in my church over somebody who's 20. I have much to learn, and we can all learn from each other and grow from each other. And so, while I may be a little bit further along in apologetics, I can help people, women, young women, older women in my church, learn those things, and then also glean things that I'm weaker in. So.
Yeah, well, along those lines, were there any resources, like specific resources or people that helped you along the way that God used? Maybe God put someone, I know growing up military, God always put people in our lives everywhere we moved.
Mhm.
Was there anything like that? Any people or resources you found that helped you?
Yeah, always. I mean, when I lived in Germany, I started getting to know one of my really good friends, who lives up in Virginia, and she has discipled me for the last decade. She's been through
Oh.
seminary, and so
Mhm.
she's just that further along in her, not only in her life experience, is she just
Mhm.
her boys have graduated. Oh, one's graduated high school, was in college. Um, but also in spiritually, she's just further along. And so when I have things, I'm like, I don't know what to do. She can help and
Mhm.
point me to Christ and point me back to the
Oh.
scriptures. But I would say yes, in every place, God has brought at least one person. And WIA has been such a great resource for me. And I don't say that because I'm a part of the organization. Way before I was a part of the organization, it was a
Mhm.
resource for me. And
Mhm.
now with the community of women that we're a part of, we can, we can just ask each other, hey, I have this question and I don't know how to
Mhm.
really dig through this or prayer or whatever. And so, while I do believe that we're called to in-person community, God has used our virtual community as well, to really
Mhm.
defy and grow us, in the things that we are called to be. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And I love that. And I love, since I have been able to volunteer with WIA and getting more involved in my own church, I've loved being able to witness. There's a side to being an adult where you're not just making decisions for yourself anymore. You're making decisions for entire organizations.
Yeah.
And watching this beautiful, incredible group of women make decisions on how are we going to address these tough topics? How are we going, what direction is this ministry going to take? It's been just so humbling and incredible to watch and to even get to be a part of it. I mean, it's very, very discipling and humbling. And my church is the same way, watching pastors genuinely care about the people under them and make decisions for the church that will be what's best for their flock, and really seeing that as an adult and realizing it's not just God doesn't want us to just do this in our individual lives. We steward that first, and then we also help steward the church. And
Yeah.
seeing that in real time is incredible.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you and I know this, and I'm sure our audience knows this. God calls us to our families first, right? So if
Mhm.
anything that I'm doing is taking away from the discipleship of my children or
Mhm.
myself, then I really need to take a hard look at my priorities. Where is God calling
Mhm.
me to? Sometimes he calls us to, put some things aside so that we can focus in on other things. But and an encouragement to young women, like it is not, it's not, what's the word I want to use? It is not a chokehold to be with your children. Like it is
Mhm.
a joy.
Mhm.
And oftentimes God will use being home with your children, but he'll also give you a ministry outside your children too, if that's what you desire. Whether it's with women in your own church, whether it's the Mormon missionaries that come to your front door and that they're
Mhm.
seeing Christ, because it's not by accident that you're in the neighborhood that you're in, that you have
Mhm.
the roommate in college that you have. It's not by accident that you meet the people that you meet in the grocery store. I said this is mid-September. Our team has just kind of been wrestling with what happened with Charlie Kirk, and we're going to record an episode about that at some point. But, I think there's a stirring in all of us to be more bold in our faith. And as a mom, we have we have a responsibility to raise up bold evangelists, because we love God and love others. But as just general disciple makers, God puts people in your path literally all day, every day. And it's up to you whether you're taking the bait and talking to them. And I don't want to, say that I'm perfect at that. I am not. I am not. I have a struggle with people pleasing just like anybody else. That's an encouragement, is if you feel like you don't have a direction or a ministry, look around you. What's right here, right in front of you. Study the scriptures and be ready to give an account for your faith. So
yes. And one thing that I guess you made me think of just there is, we've talked a little bit about kind of when God closes a door, when God says no, but what about when we need to say no?
Yeah.
How do we know really when that is? When, like you said, I think one sign is if it's taking away from our families, right? But how do we know when to say no? And what's some advice you would have for those situations?
Well, I would say that if anything is causing you to sin, cut it off. And only you as the audience can examine that for yourself. But I think often in my life, I have been well-meaning and where I believe that I should be serving or what I should be doing. But in essence, some things have caused me to walk in sin. And God is like, nope. And honestly, again, like I said, I have struggled with people pleasing. So a lot of that is God growing me, and he wants me to fear him more than he fears man. And so I think we need to get bolder in the way that we hold to our faith in those boundaries, right? So if I'm at work and somebody's asking me, well, not at WeUp, but if I wasn't working at WeUp, if I was working somewhere else, and my boss asked me to actively sin every day, well, I would have a loss of income. What is my current Christian witness worth? What is eternity worth to me? Is it worth my soul? And so that's bigger picture. But in the day-to-day decisions, we should always be praying for God to direct our steps and to keep us from sin, and for us to be able to love people well. If we're not, if we're not able to love God and love people, there's your answer right there. So
that's great. That's great. Well, do you have any last words of advice for people just on discerning God's will, making decisions, any of that, or anything you want to say, really?
No, I don't think so. I think that this is such a hard thing to navigate when you're a young person. I watched my daughter, who's a sophomore in high school, and she's looking at colleges, and she's like, I want to do this, but what if it affects this? And I would just say, I'm going to point you to one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible is Matthew 6:25-34. And it's Jesus saying that we should not be anxious about anything, because even the birds do not store up their food in barns. And then even the lilies don't clothe themselves. How much more precious are you than the birds of the air and the flowers of the field? Sorry, I'm like butchering that.
Oh, that's good.
but it's so true. God, he has your life in the palm of his hands, and he wants to do good for you. And so when you think like, he's not doing good things in my life, there's no way that I'm going to make a decision and it's going to turn out well. Well, you don't know, So I would just say, rest in the Lord for his life, or for your life. and he will take care of you. He will prove it over and over and over. And, I referenced Charlie Kirk earlier. One of the things that I told my pastor's wife this week is like, the world's idea of his life is like, what a shame, right? How could God use that for his good and God's glory? And ultimately, he used it for his good because he's in heaven seeing Jesus face to face. And so if we have that thought process that anything we do is for the glory of God, he'll use it. So
yeah. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Whitney. This has been such a great conversation. I feel like we could talk forever about it.
You probably could. I'm sure I'll come back on. Jade's like, do you want to be on for me? And I was like,
I'm so glad you were, though.
All right. Well, until next time.
Yes, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll get to talk again soon. And if you guys don't see her, she is always in the background too.
I am.
All right, thanks, Whitney. What a fun conversation. I loved having Whitney. If you liked this episode, please share with your friends, comment, send us your questions, and let us know how we can pray for you. We love you guys, and we'll see you next time.